gosh, I love them so much. There's easily 100 or 200 tabs in here. And if you don't think you have time for reading, yes you do. Yes you do. Hi, I'm Bria. Welcome to my first video. I thought it'd be fun to do a little bit and get to know me first, because you guys don't know who I am. My name is Bria. I'm 20 years old. I'm currently a college student, and I love to read. I read a ton as a kid. I would read just books on books on books. But then in high school and college, I just kind of stopped reading. It just got kind of busy. But a little over a year ago, I decided to get back into it. And so I've been reading for a little over a year now, and I'd say it's been pretty good. I love it. I love getting back into it. It's been super exciting. I'm a Christian, so that's one of my favorite genres is Christian books, theology books. But some of my other favorites are like dystopian, fantasy, YA, romance, all that good stuff. It's so much fun. I've been wanting to start a YouTube channel for a while now, so I just decided, new year, new me. Let's go for it, see what happens. Yeah, so I'm super excited to see where this goes, and follow along with me to see where I go, because I'm not really sure what I'm going to do, but that's the fun. I get to do whatever I want with this channel, and I'm excited for that. And that being said, I figured the perfect way to start off this channel is with, drumroll please, a 2024 reading wrapped. I read a lot this year. I originally set my goal on Goodreads to be 50, and then I was reading a lot more than that, so I set it to 75, and I set it again to 100 books. So my goal was to read 100 this year, and that did not go as planned, but I did read 78 books, which for my first year back at reading, I'm calling that a win. That was really good, and I loved it. So yeah, I guess I did accomplish my goal of 50 and 75. Not 100, but there's always next year, so we'll see what happens next year. But I think for my first year back, 78 is pretty good. Now for some fun reading stats. I got all these from Goodreads. If you want to follow me over there, at a link below. The average length of my books that I read was 322, which is pretty accurate. I typically read about like 300 pages, sometimes more, sometimes less, but that checks out. My average rating was 4.5 stars, which I feel like is pretty good. I read a ton of 5 stars and a ton of 4 stars this year. There's a few like 2 and 3, but not that many. So I'm usually super careful about which books I start. Either I've read them before and I know I love them, or like recommend it from a friend or something like that. So I feel like I had a really high rated year, so that was really good. And in total, I read 25,141 pages, which is crazy. 25,000. So I feel like that puts it more into perspective than like the 78 books. Like 25,000 pages, that's crazy. Now into 5-star reads. So out of the 78 books that I did read, 47 were 5 stars. That's like 60, almost 70%. Like a ton of them were 5 stars, which is a total win. I feel like the books I read this year were all so good, and I'm so glad for that. My first year back in, I feel like that really encouraged me to keep reading more, because so many of the books I was reading I loved, and I'm so excited for next year to see how many more books I read and how many 5 stars I find. So stay tuned for that. Next, I thought it'd be fun to do a genres wrapped. So here it is. My top genres, I wasn't surprised. It was romance, fantasy, and dystopian, which usually when I'm saying my favorite genres, those are the 3 that come up. Yeah, but I read 15 romance books, 19 fantasy books, and 16 dystopian books, so pretty evenly spread. And then some of the other following categories, Christian was definitely up there. I read 12 Christian books, either like theology books or like memoirs and biographies, stuff like that. Those were all really good. And then literary fiction, I started reading this year. I really haven't read that before, but I read 6 of those and I really like them. So definitely next year I'm going to try to read more of those, because those were really good. I have historical fiction. I read 3 of those. It isn't my favorite genre. I feel like it just depends on the book, but overall I think it was pretty good. And then I read 2 classics, which I'm not super into classics. They're okay, but I feel like I just like reading more for fun, and classics are a lot harder to like just sit down and read. You have to more like really understand what the author's trying to say, and I'd rather just like sit down and escape into like a dystopian world or something like that. So that's why I haven't read many of those. And then last but not least is the other category. These were books like the Eras Tour documentary book, or stuff like that, where it doesn't really fit into a genre. It's just kind of this other category. But yeah, so there's a few books that fell into that. But yeah, that's my genres wrapped. I thought it'd be fun to show you guys all the books I read this year. So without further ado, here's my 2024 library. And those were all the books I read this year. I read so much, it's crazy. I loved reading every single book. Well, I mean, there's a few I didn't like, but overall, I love reading all those books. So I figured it'd be really fun to show you all my 5-star reads and give some recommendations. Since I'm at college, I don't have a lot of my books with me. I usually just have the books I'm currently reading, so that's why a lot of the books I don't have here. So I'm just gonna pop a little picture so you can see what book I'm talking about. So these are just in the order that I read them, except I chose my 5 top favorite books, and I pulled those out and I'll show those to you at the end. But without further ado, here's some book recommendations for 2025. First up is Midnight Sun. So I started reading the Twilight series in 2023, so in 2024 I'm at just the tail end of it. So I read Midnight Sun and I really liked it, honestly better than Twilight itself. I don't know, it was just really cool to see like Edward's perspective of the whole story from Twilight. So if you're familiar with that universe and haven't read Midnight Sun, definitely recommend it. It gives you a lot of insights into the story of Twilight that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Next one is Master Plan Evangelism. So I actually read this along with a group from my church. It was my college pastor and a few of us from college group read it together, and we got together and read it, and it was so much fun. I love this book. It really dives into like how did Jesus evangelize, and it's just so cool to see how he did it, and then we can replicate that in our own lives. So highly recommend that book. Super good. Next up is a series. It's the Carve the Mark series. So Carve the Mark has Carve the Mark and the Fates Divide. And oh my gosh, I love these books. They're so good. They're by Veronica Roth, who wrote Divergent, which is one of the first books that really made me fall in love with reading. So I read specifically Carve the Mark. I've read once before, years ago, so I read it again this year, and oh, it's so good. It's like a dystopian, like fantasy type thing. And there's a lot of like politics, and like you don't know who's like the heir to the throne, and like all this kind of stuff. It's really good. Highly recommend it. Next up is the Waterfire Saga. This includes Deep Blue, Rogue Wave, Dark Tide, and Sea Spell. So there's 4 books. I actually rated the first one a 4-star because I feel like not much really happened, but it's really setting up the storyline for the other 3 books, which I all rated 5 stars. And this is all about a bunch of mermaids, and there's like power struggles, and you don't know who's lying and who's telling the truth. And it's definitely like more of a YA for younger readers, but I really enjoyed the story. And there are several plot twists that are pretty good. So highly recommend that one too, especially for younger readers. Next up, Divergent, of course, 5-star. As I was saying earlier, Divergent was one of the first books that I remember reading like in middle school, and it's just so nostalgic for me. I love it. Divergent, Insurgent, Allegiant is the trilogy, and love it so much. And if you've read it before, you know the ending of Allegiant. It makes me so mad, but it's also really good. Veronica Roth is amazing. And it also has the book 4, which is like a collection of short stories specifically from the character 4's perspective, and that's also really good. Yeah, and if you haven't read Divergent before, it's a dystopian. It's set in the city of Chicago, like hundreds of years from now. Super interesting. The first book, you really get to know like the story and the characters, but then each book adds something more and just expands the world, and it's so good. Highly recommend it. And then along with Divergent, I'm just gonna mention it because it's part of the series, is We Can Be Mended, which is like an epilogue to the whole story, and this was my lowest rated book this entire year. I gave it 2 stars. I personally did not like it at all. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. No spoilers, but yeah, don't like it, but that's fine. The rest of the series, 5 stars. Next up is the Selection. So Selection is, there's 6 books in the series. First is the trilogy. It's the Selection, the Elite, and the One, and that follows this one girl in this dystopian society, and it's kind of like The Bachelor, but like futuristic, dystopian, but also like medieval princesses and kings and stuff like that. It's super good. And then you get Happily Ever After, which is a collection of short stories from different characters' perspectives all throughout those first 3 books, and that's also really good. And then you get 2 books after that, a duology, which is The Heir and the Crown, and this actually follows the daughter of the main character from the trilogy. And I gave The Heir only 4 stars because it just, I don't know, there felt like there was something missing. It was just kind of slow. But then The Crown I gave 5 stars. And yeah, highly recommend the whole series. Super good. It's a romance, but also it's a clean romance. It's more focused on kind of like more the dystopian fantasy side. So highly recommend. Next up is All Caps You. This is a 30-day devotional that, to be honest, took me like 2 years to get through because I kind of forgot about it and just put it down and then found it again. But it's really good. I highly recommend it. It's by MMA McDaniel, who I actually got to see speak a few years back. So that's how I got the book. But I highly recommend it. It's super good. Next is The Good News of Our Limits, which was actually written by one of the professors here at my college, and I had a class with him, and so I obviously had to read his book, and it's super good. It's literally the good news of our limits. Like, as human beings, we are limited, and like physically, spiritually, all that stuff, and a lot of times we look at that as a bad thing, but his book was all about how it's like we should accept our limits, and accepting our limits actually allows us to lean on God more because he doesn't have limits. And so yeah, definitely recommend reading the book. Super good. Next is How to Disappear. This is a book I read like again back in like middle school, and I recently reread it this year. It's a lot about like mental health, and it's about this girl in high school and social media too, and like the effect that social media has on our lives. It's super good. I like it. They're definitely trigger warning for suicide. So if that's something that bothers you, maybe don't read it. But yeah, definitely a good book. Not for everybody, but I really enjoyed it. Next is Safely Home. This book is so good. It is fiction, but it's based on a lot of stuff that like does happen around the world. It's basically the story about this American businessman who goes to China, and he's very oblivious about like the persecution of the Christian church and all of that. And he just takes his faith for granted, and versus going there and seeing the church and how they're persecuted, it was just super impactful. Like in America, we really are so privileged to be able to have freedom of religion, and so this book really opened my eyes to like what Christians around the world are facing. So I highly recommend reading this book. Next is Finding Starlight. This is a book that I randomly found at the thrift store, and it was advertised as Christian romance, so obviously I had to get it. Basically, it's just like reading a Hallmark movie. It's, yeah, nothing too special about it. It was really fun. It's about this girl who's like a dressmaker and about like her next door neighbor, and it's super fun and cute. Next is Tuck Everlasting. My school actually had a play of Tuck Everlasting, and I went to go see that, and I loved it. I had heard the name before, but never really known what it was. So after seeing the play, I was like, I need to read this book. I love it. It's so good. And then I was at a bookstore one day, and I just saw it, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I have to buy it. So I did, and I read it, and it was really good. Obviously, I knew the whole story, so it was a little different reading a book that I like see the play first. But still, it's really good. It's a children's book, so it's definitely like a lower level of reading, but still super enjoyable. Okay, now we're getting into books that I actually have a physical copy of with me. This is the Jesus Storybook Bible. So I was in Canada on a missions trip the past 2 summers, and this is the book that we use. We read it like as a storybook every night, and it's so cute. It has just all these little Bible stories. It's just an easy way to understand the Bible, and yeah, I love it. It's just a super good way. It goes through the entire Bible, basically every like story that you need to have. It has like the Old Testament, New Testament, everything in between. Highly recommend. Next up is Hello Stranger. I love Catherine Center's writing. I've read 2 of her books. This was the second one I've read of hers this year. So good. This is a girl who is in an accident and gets facial blindness, and the catcher is she's a portrait artist. So literally her entire life depends on her being able to see and paint faces. And so just one day she wakes up and she can't see faces anymore. And it's like navigating her story of like, what is she supposed to do? And she's like in the middle of a super important contest that could like change her life. So she kind of needs to paint someone's face when she can't see it. So it is so good. And the plot twist, my jaw was on the floor. It was so good. I literally finished the book and was like, I have to reread this. So this is my first reread of the entire year, which is crazy. Like, I literally read this twice. And so many tabs. That's how you can tell I love a book, is when there's literally so many tabs in it. Like, it's just so good. This book also has like a lot of about mental health in it too, just because of the stuff she's going through. So there's a lot of good quotes all throughout here about like mental health, like seeming okay and being okay are not the same thing. And that's so true. She's just so good. I love her books, if you can't tell, so highly recommend Hello Stranger. And it is a romance, and it is a clean romance, so highly recommend. Next up is the Aerostar book. I am a Swiftie, and I went to the Eras tour with my sister, and it was so much fun. And so when the book came out, I had to get it. It's so good. It basically like feels like you're at the Eras tour. Like you could just like flip through it, and it's so good. I mean, it's more of like a picture book than it is like an actual book, but as a Swiftie, I just love it so much. So 5 stars. Next is A Second Chance Year. This is actually a book of the month. This is my first one ever. I decided to try it out this year, so this is the first month I got. This is one from their holiday collection. So this is about basically the second chance year, where this girl has a horrible year, and at the end of the year she goes to a fortune teller and just like kind of jokingly wishes to like do it all over again. And so she wakes up the next day and it's a year before, so she gets to go through her life that whole year a second time. And it's just really cool, just a perspective of her like balancing like which year was better, like do I want the second year, do I want to go back to the first year. It was really good. It's also a romance, and again it's a clean romance, definitely recommend. And there's a lot of tabs. I tabbed this while I was on vacation, so I forgot to bring my actual tabs, so that's why it kind of looks crazy, but so good, highly recommend. Next up is A Siren. This is also by Kara Cass, who also wrote the selection. I've read all of her books and they are all 5 stars, so anything by Kara Cass, highly recommend. This one specifically is just a one-off, so it's unlike her other books where they're mostly series or duologies. Yeah, super recommend it. It's about a group of mermaids or sirens and their story of what they're going through. They're basically enslaved to the ocean, and it's also a romance book. It's so good. Oh my gosh, I love them so much. Yeah, highly recommend. All right, here we are, top 5 books of the year. Number 5, Practicing His Presence. This is a book I've wanted to read for years. I've got it recommended to me by a bunch of like my youth group and like people at my church. It's about Brother Lawrence and Frank LeBach, who are one's a monk and then one's another guy who lived a few hundred years after the first guy. And basically it's their letters, and so it really feels like they're writing to you. And basically Brother Lawrence had the idea of just intentionally being in God's spirit 24/7, and he basically journaled his journey of going from, you know, like praying a few times a day to like intentionally being with God every second of every day. And man, it is so good. It's so convicting too, because I feel like it's just so easy to just like pray a few times throughout the day and just move on, versus like intentionally being with God all the time, because God's here all the time, but are we really focusing on that fact? Yeah, highly recommend that. I highlighted a lot, so yeah, it's super good. Highly recommend it. Number 4 is another Catherine Center book. This was the first book of hers that I read, which also is her most recent one, which I didn't know that. I just kind of randomly picked it up. But also, edges are so pretty. That's honestly why I got it, is because I wanted to read a Catherine Center book, and it's just so pretty. And I tabbed it, and there's so many tabs. I freaking love this book. It's about these 2 screenwriters. One of them, the guy is like super famous, and then the girl is like just getting started. And basically they get forced to work together on a project, and they basically hate each other. So it's an enemies to lovers, and it is so good. The way she writes romance is so good, because it's not just like physical or like a connection like that at all, but it's like the emotional connection and like how they actually fit together as 2 human beings. And it's just so good. And again, it's another clean romance, so highly recommend it. Number 3 is Lady of a Thousand Treasures. This is another one that I just randomly found at a thrift store, and it's a Christian romance. It's also like historical fiction, so I picked it up, and I love this book so much. Literally reading it, I was like, this is the best book I've read all year, and it's so good. It's about this girl who's has like an antique shop with her family, and it just talks about like her struggles and just this guy and a whole bunch of stuff, and it's so good. As you can tell, when I love a book, I tab it a ton, and you probably can't see the clear ones, but like there's easily 100 or 200 tabs in here. So good. Highly recommend it. Number 2 is a series, so I lumped all series together. It's Dividing Eden. So it's Dividing Eden is the first one, and then Eden Conquered is the second one. And then there's also 2 short novellas that go with this. That's Into the Garden and Forbidden Fruit. So those are also 5 stars, so all 4 were 5 stars for me. They're so good. They're by Joelle Charbonneau, which many people haven't heard of, but she wrote The Testing, or the Testing trilogy, which I've read several years back, and that's another one of like my favorites. It's like Divergent, Hunger Games, The Testing Trilogy. Like those are my favorites. So I honestly thought I'd read these before, but I guess I hadn't. So I read them and they're so good. It's like a fantasy dystopian. It's about these two siblings and their family, and they're a royal family, and it's about like who's getting the crown because they're twins. And it's so good. There's tons of betrayal and like who can you trust, and just it's so good. Highly recommended. And last but not least is number 1. Yeah, that this is a whole series, and there's more that I haven't read. There's so many. Okay. Oh, they're everywhere. Okay. Anyways, this is Ranger's Apprentice. This is my best friend's favorite book series, and she's been trying to get me to read it for years now. And so she bought me this book for my birthday last year, and I read it, and I really enjoyed it. But I didn't really want to read the whole series because it's an investment. There's so many of them. And then this year, she bought me the second book, and I read it. I was like, oh, it's so good. I need to read the whole thing. So I did. I read the whole thing. And in the first series, there's 11 books, which is crazy. Well, it's 10 books, and then the 11th book is like another short story, like filling in the gaps of like little random stories all throughout the first 10 books. And they're all so good. And then there's even more spin-off series. So there's just the 10 and then the 11th one. And then there's the early years, which are like a prequel to it. There's 2 books that are a prequel that tell the story of one of the characters. And then there's 2 more series after that I have not read, but I really want to. So that's another like, I think 6 and like 10 books or something like that. There's so many, but they're so good. It's basically about like this medieval time where there's the army and then there's rangers, and the rangers are like kind of like our secret service almost, where like they're highly specialized like spies and fighters and all that kind of stuff. And it's about the ranger's apprentice, it's this kid Will, who's being apprenticed by one of the rangers, and it tells his story of like becoming a ranger and all the adventures he goes on. And it's so good. It's definitely like more of like a YA and younger audience, but oh my gosh, I love it so much. And there is a little bit of romance more towards like the end of the series, and it's so good. There's not much of it, but I've honestly found that when romance is more of a subplot, I like it more. So highly recommended. I love it so much. That's all my 5 stars of the year. I hope you found some recommendation in here that makes you want to read more or find a book that you want to read in the new year. I loved reading this year. It was so much fun. I loved getting back into it. And if you don't think you have time for reading, yes you do. Yes you do. I used to watch like lots of TV and movies, and I stopped doing that and just replaced it with reading, and look how much I read this year. So you can do it too. Comment your favorite book that you've read this year, or maybe a book that you want to read next year in 2025. See if we have any in common. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you at the end of January or early February for my January reading wrap up.